Welcome, everybody. I'm going to get started in just a second. I'm just letting, there's a number of people just kind of quickly joining here, so let me give a second.
No, you should do the really cool content now, and the people who are late don't get it. You make in-jokes about it the whole time.
All right, go ahead, Joe. What's the cool content? Go ahead. What's the above the law cool content of the week?
Nothing today. I've been buried in Clarence. It was earlier this week, the Clarence Thomas Frodo Baggins conversation. He talked in court, which he never does, to ask questions about Frodo. So what we've learned is that Clarence Thomas is some kind of quiet D&D geek, which is awesome.
I had no idea.
Any more Flushing stories this week?
No Flushing. We replaced Flushing with Frodo. Who knows what next week will bring?
All right. Well, welcome to the our second attempt at doing this Legal Tech Journalists Week in Review Roundtable. Who knows? We may just make a habit of doing this on a regular basis. I have trouble with commitment, but we'll see if it goes on. But I'm Bob Ambrogi. I write the blog Law Sites, and I guess we should all introduce ourselves real quick. Joe, since you were just talking on.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm Joe Patrice from Above the Law. I'm here for this second edition of it's like the McLaughlin Group, but for legal technologists.
Exactly.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Go ahead, Molly.
Hi, I'm Molly McDonough. I'm a longtime legal affairs journalist and writer and editor.
Caroline.
Hi, Caroline Hill, editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider, also the Orange Rag monthly newsletter.
And Nikki.
I am Nikki Black. I am the legal technology evangelist with MyCase. We provide practice management software for small firms, and I'm also an attorney and journalist, and I write for ABA. I have a monthly tech column with ABA Journal, bi-weekly with Above the Law, weekly with Daily Record. I also write weekly on the MyCase blog and occasionally other outlets. I write all over the place.
And all right, and last but not least, Zach.
Saving the best for last. Already.
Yeah,
I can't speak. Hey, everybody. I'm Zach Warren, editor-in-chief of Legal Tech News. That is with ALM and Law.com. So you'll occasionally see me on other ALM publications like The American Lawyer, Corporate Counsel, etc. All right.
I'm amazed that we're all kind of in the green room before this talking about the fact I was amazed that so few people had heard about the Twitter feed rate my Skype background. So sometime we're going to have to do a rate my Skype background for the legal tech world or something like that. But some good backgrounds here today.
Well, full disclosure, mine's fake. So
no, yours is fake? Man, I was going to give you like a 10. That's so nice.
Yours looks so great.
I noticed that last time. When she moves, sometimes you can tell it's fake, and but I didn't know until like midway through the last session.
So you haven't read all those books? Planted all those plants?
Oh yeah, no, I kill plants. I don't grow them. This is totally fake. Not just the background, but the reality it portrays.
we do tech plants. We don't do real plants.
All right, so the format here is we're all going to go around and kind of talk about our picks for the top stories of the week and exchange views on them. Anybody watching is free to shoot some questions through the chat or the Q&A forum if you want to do that, and we'll be happy to try and take them. But we are going to start today with Molly McDonough. What do you got, Molly?
All right, so big news yesterday. The trustees in the California Bar voted to, I guess, move forward with working out a sandbox for development of new tools for access to justice in the state. So that was exciting news. I'm not sure that they need to spend an enormous amount of time on working out a roadmap, since Utah already has kind of paved that road for them. So we'll have to see what develops out of that. It's a big step, but I'm not sure when they'll take the next big step.
Right, or exactly what the step was. It is a little confusing. I mean, it's like we're going to appoint another committee to study what the last
Right.
committee recommended we do.
Right. It seemed really exciting at first, and then when you start to read it, you're like, they're just kind of committing to thinking about it.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like that happens with a lot of PR announcements in general.
Yeah.
They seem really exciting, then you read them, you're like, oh, all right.
Yeah.
So
But I
we
think-
apologize to all of our PR listeners right now for that.
Right. No, we only get the
Legal
good
tech
PR
in
people.
general. I just meant like, sorry.
There's plenty of reference to steps. I'm noticing in the coverage, it's a big step, significant step. But sometimes it's between the lines. But from it seems it's progress, right? Like with this combined with Utah, it seems like at least it's progress. It's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
and they did.
It wasn't a PR thing, obviously. It was a lawyer thing, maybe even worse. But sorry, Nikki, go ahead.
I was just going to say they did kind of commit to the more expansive approach, which would give them the most options to come up with solutions and to access to justice, which is kind of a big step too. It would be monumental for California to get into this game. So, I mean, whatever California does is going to really make a difference and be instructive for jurisdictions just because of the depth and breadth of the legal issues in the state.
Yeah, that was my exact thought with it. Is no disrespect to our friends in Utah, but California is just kind of a bigger scale than anything that has happened previously. And similar to something like the CCPA, where it's being seen as a little bit of a bellwether for privacy, if California is the one to adopt this, then I think you'll start to see the dominoes really fall here.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it a third of all lawyers in the U.S. or in Canada or something like that? I mean, in California, probably in Canada right now. But all right. Anything else on that? Who wants to go? Who wants to go next? Who wants to volunteer? Nikki, you want to go?
Oh, sure. The thing that interested me that's been catching my eye lately is tangentially, it was the news that Zoom had acquired a company called Keybase so that they could work on providing end-to-end encryption, because once video conferencing exploded on the scene, suddenly this issue, especially in the legal space of adequate security, became an issue. And then there was all this news, which in some ways I think might have been from competitors of Zoom getting it out there, but about different, that's my theory, I have nothing to base that on, but about different loopholes in Zoom security and whatnot, or Zoom bombing. But I mean, at the end of the day, what interested me about it was this idea and the discussion of encryption and what a lawyers actually need, whether it's video conferencing or otherwise. And I've been talking about this for a number of years. I think it's interesting that Zoom wants to get that end-to-end encryption, but when it comes to lawyers, I would argue that you don't need the end-to-end encryption. And the difference between that is end-to-end means that not only is it encrypted during the video chat, but it's encrypted on the server so that employees of Zoom cannot later look at the recordings of the video, if you will. And in most situations, that's just not, lawyers aren't required to have that level of encryption and that reduction of access, if you will. First of all, lawyers are already using email. Unencrypted email all the time. It's technically been given the green light for years by the Bar Association, although they're starting to change this. ABA issued opinion 477 in May of 2017. And then just recently, Pennsylvania issued an opinion just last month where they adopted the reasoning in ABA 477. And essentially what it was the idea that on a case-by-case basis, lawyers need to examine the communications, and for particularly sensitive communications, they need to use encrypted communication. But that just means encrypted during transit, right? So email is not encrypted during transit if you're using unencrypted. So when it flows from one place to another and goes to all the different servers, anybody who has a know-how can look at it because it's a postcard written in pencil, essentially, going through the post office. So the idea is that what most lawyers need for particularly sensitive information, according to the ethics opinions, is encryption in transit. Most lawyers do not need that encryption at rest where the provider cannot access it. They want it to be encrypted at rest, but not necessarily encrypted from the provider, because the provider needs to access it to answer your questions, to change settings for you, etc. So that's why I've always explained that only for lawyers that handle particularly sensitive information, you represent somebody who, and this is going to get to another topic we're talking about later, but a very famous person, and you hold that very famous person's data. If you represent a Chinese dissident, if you represent someone accused of terrorism, those are situations where the data that you hold is of such interest to someone for some reason that they might want to break into your system and access it. But otherwise, whether it's someone from the company or just an outsider. But in most cases, lawyers don't need to have that hold that encryption key themselves. And this is a sort of complex topic for an entire presentation, but maybe if someone wants to, I think someone just wants to dive in there.
So I wrote a feature called "To Zoom or Not to Zoom," and tried to unpick, take different angles. So I looked at the corporate angle. So a lot of clients have banned it. I looked at the law firm angle, but I also spoke to a couple of sort of what I'd like to think of as that were sort of third-party, unbiased cyber experts, including a guy called Andrew Beckett from Kroll. And I was really interested. I wasn't quite sure ahead of conversation what he would say in terms of, I was like, should law firms, my angle was, should law firms be using Zoom full stop? And actually, at the time they had just brought out Zoom 5.0, which has improved the encryption. It's not end-to-end encryption, but it's much stronger, improved, as you know. And he said, and I'm looking at it now, so for law firms, he said, do your own risk assessment, start with the risk that you're trying to protect against, which is basically, Nikki, what you were just saying. So you're saying if you're worried about Zoom bombing or someone coming onto the call flashing obscene images, obviously now you can password protect it. There's improved security measures, which for a lot of firms will go a long way to answering any security concerns they had. But obviously, he said, but he did make the point that I think again, this goes to your point, that if there are genuine concerns, then just use something else. It was like, that so there are other products in the market which have stronger, end-to-end encryption. He said he did suggest that it's quite that unless you're doing, as you say, it's particularly high profile client or super secret, top secret government work, in which case you won't want to use it. He said actually that with the latest patches or security measures that it should be fine for most people, although I do understand that I think one of the issues is a certain amount of trust now as well. I think that obviously there's been a lot of ups and downs and they've been caught. We wrote this week about another case of a Bible group that's now bringing class action against Zoom because of pornographic material shown during the Bible class. Which has just come out. So I think that there's a matter of trust. I think that that's a big concern, which might take some time. And then from the corporate perspective, that there's the question of what do you do about the fact that a lot of the clients have banned it officially. So you've got SpaceX, you've got Tesla, you've got a bunch of other ones who have come out and said we won't allow our employees to use it. So I guess and then that take and then if you really go down that rabbit warren, it's like, well, do we allow our clients to dictate what technology we use? And actually, there's a real danger. I think so. What I think the summary was: have a clear policy, have a clear policy internally about what you use it for, and then if you're going to use it, put it in your engagement letter. Be very clear about what matters, and then don't allow your clients to actually dictate to you how you use it, because that's also a bit of a slippery slope.
Although
I wanted to
say that in Massachusetts, where I am, we have an ethics opinion that in fact says that our clients can dictate what security we take.
But for internal, I think it was
we have to do what our clients say. And also that ABA opinion that Nikki referenced does say that you should be consulting with your clients about this and essentially getting their buy-in in terms of what security measures you're
right. I think I did
advise them about it, but you need to get their agreement on it if it's a matter of if it's a matter of high sensitivity or very privileged information. But
I think I didn't differentiate. So because I mean, so you could use it internally, and then I think because also there's different ways. Obviously, you could use it for internal, different basically there's like several shades of grey, you know, and it's sorry, Nikki.
Well, I was just going to say, Erwin Kramer posted a question and said, essentially, how do we get Luddite lawyers and the judiciary to sort of get them over that security hump and agree to use these systems? And I was just going to say, my short answer is, a pandemic's a great way to get them over that bump. I mean, in the last, month, we've seen legal tech, vault forward a decade. So that has been a positive part. I mean, the courts are truly trying to provide video conferencing to move the essential cases forward. So I think that that's been a great way to do it. Wouldn't have been my preferred way, but it is what it is.
One of the things that I've really appreciated during this time too are the people who are willing to take the time to demonstrate to the courts and to lawyers how the technology works. One of the things I listened to the recording of the legal services briefing on domestic violence this week, and one of the things that kind of changed the atmosphere in North Carolina was one of the agencies did a mock proceeding and showed the judges how the technology can be used so that they could continue doing some of the court work remotely. And then they got the buy-in because they were able to demonstrate and show them how it worked, how to use it. And I think I'm seeing more of that with more organizations, lawyers, groups doing these kind of mock trials, mock programming, just to show how it works. And I think that helps. And especially if you can talk about the security when you're doing those demonstrations, I think that goes a long way too. And I assume you should be able to do the same thing for your clients.
One other thing I wanted to add to Erwin's point about not going back is exactly just today, all the chief justices of all of our courts in Massachusetts sent out a letter to all the lawyers in the state. It's an amazing letter, but one thing they say is that, quote unquote, we are more quickly than many thought we could, and with some stumbles along the way, creating a more modern and efficient court system that will survive after the pandemic has passed. So, even the courts are saying, we ain't going back. This is changing things. It's really significant.
Well, there's a tie to close 10 out on this one. I think what lawyers, the judiciary, and anyone handling confidential information really needs to understand is that there's no such thing as absolute security. There never has been, there never will be. There's a standard of reasonable care in implementing security and taking reasonable steps to ensure confidential client data remains confidential. And so you aren't expected to prevent every single possible situation from happening. That being said, and sometimes things happen that are completely outside of anyone's control, and other times things happen because you didn't take adequate security measures, and you've got to make sure that you're walking that fine line. But
yeah, speaking of questions or comments from the audience, Mike Whalen made a comment about Lupul. Are we calling it Lupul? Lupl? And Caroline, I know you were interested in talking about that. Can you? What is it? And what's have you figured it out?
That is the question, Bob. And do you know what? After I suggested I talk about it, I have to come out with a big sort of, I think the honest truth is that we're learning more. It came out this week. So my headline today was, is it Rain and Court? Is it Teams? Is it IQ? No, it's Lupul. And I'm like, because the feedback on social...
That clears it up for us.
Does it clear up? So it's, and actually it's interesting because it's definitely the story that most people have been talking to me about this week, including my interviews today with two big CIOs who both brought it up. And it is, so it's the result of collaboration between... It's been a long time in the running, so 12 months preparation between law firms, in-house teams, and I think the way that it was explained to me is that it's an open platform, and they call it, and this is not going to help either, Matter Sync. This is not what was written. This is a conversation I had late this afternoon, saying they call it Matter Synchronization Software, and they say that it's a new category, and basically what it does. And I'm still, to be honest with you, until I speak to the COO next week in person, I'm a bit light on more detail. But it consolidates. So as we all know from our own personal experiences, there's a raft of different ways that we communicate. So it might be Google Docs, it might, and we obviously use the DMS. We've got email, and we've got all different modes of communication, Slack, Zoom, and there's a proliferation that's just growing, particularly in light of remote working. And it's a consolidator, effectively. It's a matter management tool, but not in the way that we would understand that. It's a kind of interface that will help to help bring that content together, including the DM. And there's interesting quotes from both Neil Arajo at iManage and Alvin Tejumulia at NetDocuments. And there's quotes from LexisNexis. There's other quotes. They've done a really good job in terms of bringing in quotes from law firms. So they've got CMS involved. Trying to look here. So the firms that were involved in terms of the incubation are CMS, Cooley, and Raja and Tan. They're working with an advisory board of 16 in-house lawyers from blue chip firms, and then the wider law firm testing group is Sorsham May, Cause, Westgarth in Australia, Kyton & Co in India, One Essex Court, which is obviously a leading barristers' court over here, and then I think, and it's definitely caused, I mean, from the CIOs that I've spoken to, it's caused huge interest. I don't know if has anyone else been, just on Hope Mike, so is it new or a competitor to solutions that already exist? I mean, yeah, I think a lot remains to be seen, to be honest with you. What's anyone else heard about Loophole? Have you heard much?
Yeah, we talked to him the other day too, and the one thing that really stood out when I wrote up the initial article, then our Reese Dipshan was the one who actually reached out to him, and in their conversation, they made sure to stress that it's not open source because it's still going to be proprietary software. They need to make it a standalone business separate from these firms that started it, but it is open API. So what they're trying to do is be the connector for pretty much literally everybody in the same space, which is why it's the same thing as you, Carolyn. The fact that both iManage and NetDocs are already not necessarily supporting this tool, but they said, yeah, it's something that interests us. LexisNexis, the same thing. I think it's not necessarily groundbreaking in what it's trying to do, but I think it might be groundbreaking in who all it's bringing together. Because if there's a mass of support behind something like this, then that just becomes kind of the go-to right off the bat.
My instinct is that it will tread on toes, and I think that it's interesting that they've got those two particularly to comment. You know, that my initial question was, you know, I think that it's bound to step on toes, but you're right to point out the open API and that it's a connector, and it's designed for what's interesting. So as we know, like a lot of technology doesn't bridge law firms and the corporate sector very well, but this is specifically targeted at both. It's a kind of all embracing. I mean, it almost, I don't know. I think there's a lot more conversations to be had about it, to be honest with you. And initially, what was quite amusing was the confusion that it caused on social media. This great announcement, which everybody was like, "Well, what is it?" You know, which is why I used my headline. You know, was it a bird? Is it a plane? But I think that they've certainly done. You know, they've obviously had it's still in beta. But they've had a lot. We've had a lot of conversations behind the scenes. And what's interesting is the from people who, you know, the excitement that it's causing, actually, from people who aren't just caught up by press release, you know, news by press release, like sort of innovation by press release. There's a lot of people that have been coming to us and talking about it who are genuinely excited, which is what puts it on my radar more than anything else.
Yeah, which is something that's interesting to me too. Like you brought up Rain in Court earlier. Especially recently, I don't think there's been too many buzzy technologies that have really made a splash upon entrance. But that was one of them, I think, definitely last year around ILTACon time. And right about now, I think, especially normally this week would be Clock, if not for pandemic. That would have been a heck of a time to try and make that splash. And especially in the corporate legal ops world, how exactly that would have been received. Would have been interesting to see.
Yeah. But my understanding, Rain in Court has had it's slowed down a little bit during this pandemic. I think they had some either salary reductions or layoffs or something. Don't quote me on that, but I know there was some disruption to their business as a result of all this, because some of those development products and getting companies set up on their platform have been put off on side burner for a while as as firms dealt with the more pressing matters of dealing with the situation we're in now. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like we were saying last week about the priorities. Suddenly,
Right.
whether it's on the, is it on fire? Is it going to be on fire?
Right. Yeah.
How soon will it be on fire? And if it's not on fire, we don't really care.
Yeah. Yeah. Zach, what else do you got? What else is interesting you this week?
Yeah, it probably wasn't the biggest story out there, but it's just one that I'm tracking because I find it very interesting. They're the Indian law firm, and excuse me if I mispronounce this, but Cyril Amarchand, I believe is how you pronounce it. But their legal tech incubator graduated its first round of startups this year. Originally, the incubator started 2019 after 7-month program. JRTC intern, legality, legal mind, a few of the names there. Legal tech incubators are becoming very common, but especially outside of US and Europe. There's been very strong growth even over the past 12 to 24 months. And seeing this first Indian incubator really start to get off the ground, Russia, Australia, all of these international climates, you're really seeing legal tech grow into an international thing in a way that it really wasn't even 2-3 years ago. It's, like I said, not the largest story, but something that I think is definitely worth talking about because it's going to be increasingly an influence in this industry moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, there's just so much. I mean, it's not surprising that there would be a lot of activity in India because there's been a lot of activity in India for a number of years in some ways. But another area that seems to just be sort of taking off as a hotbed of legal tech lately is Africa, especially some of the Southern Africa countries. And there's really a lot of interesting stuff going on there.
I think a lot of it comes down to as well, though. So how much government backing? So if you see, say for example, in Singapore, where the government has got so well behind, so obviously that's one of the jurisdictions which I think is just flying. And then one of the reasons is because there's so much state sponsorship of the initiatives. So I think that the firms, it's really great to see this firm, taking this step. I think obviously, hopefully that will then translate into more government funding and government initiatives in the way that it has in Singapore. I think actually, Singapore is, I would say for me, leading the field in that sense, in terms of the level of government initiatives that we're seeing. And I think it's telling in the investment and that's then translating into firms setting up there, or vendors setting up there. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking to see if he showed up. I know that a guy I know, come to know from Russia, who's sort of the legal tech guru of Russia, had signed up for today's program. I don't see that he's on here now. I would have asked him for some comment on this. But I mean, Russia is another place where there is just a whole lot of really interesting stuff going on. And it is government funded largely, interestingly enough. A lot of the legal tech startups are getting direct support and grants from the Russian government, but they have a lot of aspirations to expand their market, well beyond Russia into not just Europe but the United States as well. So that'll be something interesting to follow. Joe, I haven't called on you because I'm not sure if you had a topic or not, but because
yeah, I didn't. I came into it late, and everyone had already come up with all these good topics, so I didn't have any. I figured I could talk about the others. I mean, I know that we have the conversation about the terrorist attack going on Grubman, so I thought that might be an issue that we could all talk about.
Yeah, you mean the ransomware attacks, or?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, yeah, several people mentioned this, and I mean, there's been a number of ransomware attacks in the news over the last few weeks, really, against law firms, against legal vendors, against an entire court system in Texas. What was that, last week or earlier this week? The Texas courts were hit with it. I thought the kind of the most fascinating one in a sense was this the New York City law firm that represents all the A-list celebrities and that's had their that the attackers are now starting to sort of slowly post documents on their website, which is you need the Tor browser to get in to see it. It's not on the open web, but they're starting as somebody sent me another document today that was some kind of a contractual issue with Lady Gaga that got posted up there. But the attackers are asking for $42 million in ransom from this law firm, and I don't know.
They now say they're going to.
Do they have it?
They now say they're going to release a bunch of documents about Donald Trump if they don't get it.
Yeah, that's what I thought was so interesting. They're pulling him in to try to have him force the law firm's hand on paying. That was super interesting to me. A really strange tactic, but possibly
it's interesting, but it's not clear what they have. I mean,
Right.
According to the report, this was in page 6 of all places, reporting Legal Tech News here, but. They said that Trump was never a client of this firm, and so it's not exactly clear what documents there might be there, although certainly could have been clients of the firm who had dealings with Trump in some way.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if they just think that Trump has so much dirty laundry that if they drag him into it somehow, he'll think they have something. And I because it just seems like, I don't know, like an interesting tactic. Like what are they dragging him into it for? And it's his ego. They're playing on his ego somehow, or his fears.
Yeah.
The wording is really strange. So someone sent me the screenshot. It says our demand was 21,000. Sorry, 21 million. 21 million. Then the initial. It's just the wording is really weird. Like the language is quite strange. So the ransom is now 42,000. That's the kind of money. That's the kind of money, and even more. But let's about nice one. After the publication, there was a report of abuse. If once again there will be such reports, we rent 100 servers with fast flags and we'll make uploads. It's just and then the next person will be publishing. This is from the original screenshot that someone sent me that they published on the dark web. The next person we'll be publishing is Donald Trump. I think this is all probably in page 6. There's an election. And it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And this is obviously this group. They've been super active. I'm not sure whether you say Revel or Revel. Does anyone know how you pronounce it correctly? So this is this group. They're becoming quite prolific.
Right.
In terms
They
of
remind me of the villain from Austin Powers. They just keep upping the ante, and just picking random numbers that they're gonna request.
And then it says
$55 million.
And the end of the screenshot, war to victory only this way. Like, I mean, if it wasn't so serious, it would be hilarious. But it's just, and we were talking about this kind of offline about, you kind of feel, it's about, do you feel sorry for instinctively we feel sorry for the firm. Nobody would wish this on anybody, but it's becoming such a prolific thing. I mean, I've been sent this week several of these sort of shares from the dark web, and it's obviously something that we're going to have to start working out how we address in a relatively systematic sort of way.
Yeah. I mean, one of the issues for me, and as I kind of said to the panelists before we started, I don't know if this is quite a journalistic ethics issue for me, but I when I first wrote about the New York City law firm last week, I for some reason decided I didn't want to name them. I felt there was really kind of no reason to, expose them for something that happened to them and that could happen to any of us probably. And then, of course, within hours of my post, they had been named in any number of other stories. So I didn't really get anywhere with that. And yet, when I had reported on the ransomware attack against Epic, a month ago or 2 months ago, whenever that was, I had no problem reporting their names. I felt like that was something that was really of importance to a lot of law firms who have their client data with that company. But I had a email communication with this the security analyst guy threat analyst guy that I keep talking to on these cases. And I mean, his argument is that it's really important for the press to report the identities of companies or firms or whatever that have been affected by this, because the attackers hold out this sort of promise of anonymity as a way of trying to increase the ransom. And if you if you eliminate that anonymity around it, then the attackers are less likely to keep upping the ante in terms of the ransom they can demand, and perhaps are going to be less incentivized to do these attacks in the first place. So I don't know. Anybody else have any thoughts on how you handle that?
I also think there's something to be said for the passage of time and the development of this tech. I think that about, like 5 or 6 years ago, if this happened to somebody, I would feel very conflicted about is this firm a firm that isn't prepared, hasn't expended its money on security and so on, and am I, by reveling in their pain, exposing all these like ethical lapses or whatever, even though they're more or less in line with what other people are doing. Today, I think that firms are sufficiently caught up, a lot of them, on the need for security protocols and so on, that this is more like this can happen to anybody situation, as opposed to me exposing that your firm is weak. I think if we talked about it back in the past, we were saying, look, the firms are the soft underbelly that you can go attack. Today, we're saying, no, they're ready. It's just, people can get in there.
But does anyone know? So, and I don't know. I don't want to, draw conclusions that are not there. But so when with COVID, we all started remote working. One of our questions was, how does that impact security? And one of the interesting things, and I genuinely, don't know enough about this to know whether there's any connection. I think what will be interesting for us to look into is whether there is any, because there's been now a raft of ransomware that seems to be more. It seems to have increased. And I think that it would be interesting to find out whether there is any connection between firms remote working and whether there are holes in their arrangements. And because that was our initial, the conversations that we were having straight away was how will your remote working arrangements affect security? So it may be that it may be a coincidence. It could well be, but there's certainly been there seems to be, Bob, do you see? I mean, I haven't seen this many. Like, I'm getting emails every day saying, and this new firm, and I haven't even looked into half of them, to be honest with you. Is that the same?
Well, but ransomware is related to servers and physical servers that are housed in the firms that are getting locked up. It's their actual physical system. The cloud, you rarely see, unless, when people store stuff in the cloud and it's housed on Amazon, you're not seeing ransomware attacks. That actually protects your data. So if they lock up your physical systems, your computers or your server in your firm, you have copies of all the data in the cloud. And all of the remote working that people are doing is over the internet, right? So
So I mean, they've obviously got a raft of different arrangements. They're using VPN and VDI, and there's a whole raft of different ways. There's not. So there's not. I mean, there's not just one shape fits all. So they're using.
But ransomware is when people get an email and they download something onto their computer and it gets into the system through the VPN or whatever. So they're VPNing, they're remoting into the firm system, and that's how it's locking into the system. And I would suggest that probably if there is a correlation, it's because the companies know that there's no IT people on site. So that's where the weak link is. They don't have the IT people there.
Yeah, so there is obviously, there's a connection. It's interesting in itself, isn't it? Because obviously, I mean, I think that obviously brings in the. Anyway, I mean, I just think it's interesting. I was just I haven't looked into it. I haven't sort of done any research into it, but it just seems that it's definitely.
It'd be interesting to know. I mean, it seems to have started in earnest against law firms last year sometime, before all this broke.
I don't think that's new. It's that new. I do think that I think the willingness to report on it and the fact that this is going more public is newer. And I think for a lot of the reasons Joe mentioned, that's the case. I said offline earlier that this reminds me of over 10 years ago when the FBI was super reaching out to legal journalists, letting them know that, hey, these firms are being attacked or targeted for phishing. And their point at the time was, you have to get the word out. You have to let people know that this is a security risk, and that legit, firms that should know better are having trouble with this. And a lot of it's accidental, and a lot of the phishing attempts are, really easy to click on. So, that I think that helped firms, once the reporting started, helps firms have a broader awareness, understand what they need to do to close those holes, those security holes.
And also what Bob was saying about once it's out there, so the advice that we've been getting from people sending this to us is that it makes it easier for the firm once it's when they're operating behind this veil of huge secrecy, then it's all in the ransomware attacker's favor, obviously.
Yeah, and just thinking about this, I don't know whether it's a positive or negative in terms of ethics, but from a psychological standpoint, I've noticed it seems a lot different if we're writing on, oh, this is hypothetically a thing that could happen, or, oh, this is a thing we've heard it's happened before, versus DLA Piper systems are down. If you put an actual face and name to it, people start to open their eyes a little bit more and say, oh, I know people over there. Oh, this is a firm that should have, and probably very well does have, very strong defenses if it can happen to them.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
So we're just laughing if everyone looking at the chat. So the reason we're laughing is Nikki, we're about to lose you. Nikki said there's a thunderstorm, but for some reason it looks lovely and sunny.
Yeah.
They're calling me a liar.
Yeah.
Fake background we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's an illusion.
Yeah.
I do want to just on the journalistic ethics component. I do think there's a difference too in naming people where there's an active security issue. I've definitely held off doing even reporting on security breaches because I don't want to invite more damage. But that's another issue. And if the organization doesn't actively work to respond, at some point you have to be the watchdog and say, nope, we're not going to hold off anymore.
Yeah. Although that can come back to haunt you as a journalist, because that happened to me with the Epic. I was the first one to report that the Epic got attacked, but I didn't report it as a ransomware attack at first, because when I called them, they said, we're really not sure. We're investigating this. And everything pointed to a ransomware attack, but they said, would you mind just not reporting it as a ransomware attack yet until we can figure this out, and we'll get back to you. And of course, by the time they get back to me, everybody else was reporting it as a ransomware attack. So, that's what I got for for being nice.
It's very emotionally charged, and lots of threats going around, and so with it's very complicated, with the advanced situation that we talked about last week. So Turkensec, who's this InfoSec company, said, we want you to make a joint disclosure. And they said, you must not make any disclosure. We won't have our name associated with it. And they're saying, well, we want you to do the right thing and admit that there's an open database. And then obviously there's a lot of dispute about what exactly is available, and advances that there's almost nothing. And Turkensec says, actually, there's a significant amount. It's to try to unpick it sometimes, I think, and make sure that you make the right call, which obviously to all of us is the most important thing, is for many reasons, it's hugely complex, and you can lose sleep over it, I think.
Yeah. If there's anybody else out there who has a question they'd like us to address, we're getting near the end of the time here, so go ahead and get it in there. One other story I wanted to mention, and I think it's big only because it's of the dollar amount involved, was the investments this week. There were 4 separate investments in tech companies involving contracts tech of one kind or another, adding up to a total of $92 million in a single day. This all came on Monday. It was all announced on Monday anyway. $92 million. one of them, I'm embarrassed to admit, the biggest one of the lot, $44 million in the Sirion Labs, I had never even heard of them before until I read about this. That was news to me. But apparently they are, a huge player in this space. So, I mean, I don't know. Anybody has any thoughts on whether that means anything? I mean, we've been seeing a lot of investment in, AI related contract tech for a long time now. And I think all of these claim to have some AI component to what they do here. So this is, in some ways just an extension of a trend we've been seeing, but it also shows that even a global pandemic is not going to slow down investment in legal tech, I guess.
Well, I actually did a podcast. So above the law, we've started a second podcast just because of so much COVID related stuff going on. So we have it's like a 3L class, COVID and the law. Anyway, our episode this week, we talked to Knowable about contract stuff. And I think one of the things that was said, I think was right, is that a lot of this interest in contracts is all of a sudden those obscure terms in the contract are super important now. Wait, what does happen if you're 30 days late on the supply chain? Like, what do I get? What do you get? Like, knowing and having the ability to immediately figure out what your deal is huge right now.
Wait, I just talked to Knowable for my podcast too.
Oh, there we go.
I think it shows that there's so all of these deals. I'm worried that I added it up wrong. So I did a tally as well, and I wrote about a few of them, and I got to 75 million. Bob, you obviously had one that I didn't have, or else
you were in pounds.
My maths, no, in dollars. My maths is really bad at the best of times. But so.
Well, maybe mine was off. Let's see.
Oh my god. So no, I don't know that we did the same. But we did.
That's why we all went to law school, so we would never have to add anything. Right? So clearly, it's showing.
It's not my fault. But so Syrian Labs, it's funny because I was speaking to Zach Abramovich, and he talked about Syrian Labs. And he went, oh, you should look into this. And then you wrote about it, and I'm like, oh my god! And obviously it came out that day. And what it shows, so they're obviously.
Oh, you're right. I've got 70 million. I did say the wrong number.
Oh, thank God for that. Yeah. I mean, what the hell did I miss?
You're good.
So they're in contract. So the raises were all around or mostly at least around the contract space. So particularly contract lifecycle management. So. Yeah. And I think that it just goes to show that in areas, and I think this has been accelerated by remote working, so where private equity are obviously identifying it's funny because it's like, I think I wrote it as this is where they think you'll be spending your cash because it's all around the spaces that will help corporate legal departments and firms to be more efficient and stay on top of their contracts now that we're all working away from the office. So it seemed to me that was quite interesting that so I think, so Syrian is contract lifecycle management, Law Geeks is another one, which as we know is all around the review of contracts, Chorus. I didn't actually know Chorus very well, actually they don't really fit into that category. Malbec is another one that you wrote about, Bob, which raised 3 million, so smaller, but nonetheless it's another CLM funding round story. And then LexCheck, which raised 3 million, which is also, they all say AI, contracting platform. So they're all in the contract space, which I thought was quite interesting.
Right. Yeah. Yep. All right. Anything else anybody else wanted to talk about this week? We did get a very long comment here that I'm not going to read all of regarding the fact that law firms are so naive about computer security.
Yeah, I mean,
he invites a pun here by saying, "Stop thinking like a lawyer and start think like a bad guy." But we could go places with that.
No, I mean it's true. There's a lot of naivete out there.
Yeah.
Well, there was a question about reopening in legal, how that's going. In New York, at least, there's some interesting things happening. The New York State Bar Association, I just wrote about this for the Daily Record, but they released a guide to help law firms with that reopening process and all the different things that they need to consider with the reopening. And so I thought that was interesting. And there was also something else released out of New York that escapes me at the moment, but that reopening is, the courts have a lot to balance in terms of what is essential and what's not essential, and what's going to be done in person and what isn't, and how do they reduce traffic in the courthouse. And then the firms themselves have a lot to think of in terms of employees. You know, how are we going to stagger the employees? How are we going to have social distancing? Who needs to be there? How are we going to, who's going to work remotely? So remote working seems like it's going to be continuing for quite a long time, because until we have a vaccine, you know, I think a lot of employers, law firms included, are going to want to avoid any risk of liability for bringing everybody in and then getting sick. And then there's the issues of clients and reaching clients, and how do you have one client come in at a time, and then how do you sanitize the areas in your firm when the clients come in, and in which situations do you have the clients come in? So there's a lot of novel things to think about that we've never had to deal with before. And so that New York State Bar Association guide is really helpful to take a look at. And there was another guide issued as well. There are 2 different guides out in New York.
Is that the one, Molly? Molly, you shared one with me because I hosted my webinar, which Bob, you came and spoke on. But Molly, you shared a link with me about the courts reopening. Was that the same thing that Vicky's talking about, or was that perhaps
the National Center for State Courts held a briefing today, the Conference of Chief Justices. I didn't get a chance to make it, but they, so I'm hoping that was recorded. And that was about kind of making plans to reopen the courts. There are lots of different stages. A lot of these states have disaster plans. I mean, I don't think anyone was anticipating this scale. You know, Florida had lots of planning in place for hurricanes and shutting down and then reopening in stages. So, you know, a lot of those plans have been modified and are being implemented. So, you know, so it's just how quickly they're ramping up and what the differences are in the plans. But I do want to, I may bring this up if we do this next week, if I get a chance to actually listen to that.
Yeah, it's it was great. We had a great chat yesterday, and I saw I quoted Joe Andrews, global chairman at Denton's, who was quoted in the publication The Hill, saying that he doesn't, I don't have it in front of me, I did at the time, but saying that he doesn't foresee the lawyers having to going back to work anytime soon. Certainly not in 2020, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. You know, one other thing I meant to ask about that happened this week, I just was curious. There were 2 different major legal tech or good-sized legal tech companies had virtual conferences this week. Relativity had its Relativity Fest London, which I registered for and made it to like all of 2 sessions this week. And I just didn't get a chance to go to it, even though it went on for, I think, 3 or 4 days. And then Next Chapter, which is a bankruptcy platform owned by Fastcase, they did a 5-day long. It's probably still going on. As a matter of fact, I think starting it right about now is Jack Newton is like the closing keynote speaker for it. Did anybody go to any of those or have any thoughts on those?
I think the bankruptcy one is timely. In terms, a lot of lawyers, if they're going to be pivoting for the changing times and they want to be ready for a practice area that's going to be hot, that's one of them. You know, a lot of people and companies are going to be declaring bankruptcy. So I think it's smart of them to do that, for sure.
I meant to go to Relativity. I heard good things about a few of the sessions. I've just been, you know, I think we're all kind of caught up in our own little bubble, perhaps. I think that's one of the issues, and we're all doing webinars, and it's hard to juggle everything, is the honest truth.
Hard to juggle.
I really meant to go to. I really wanted to attend Relativity. That had some couple of really particular sessions that I really wanted to go to, but and I'm hoping that I'll be able to catch up with them. We still
have to do our day jobs. Is the problem?
Those are. There's so much. Maybe we not for now, but you know, this sort of. We've talked about the Zoom exhaustion, but you know, I think that there's so much demand for webinars and live chat, and it's great. Actually, I absolutely love it. My husband teases me that I moan about it, but he's like, "Oh yeah, you hate it." But actually, it's a lot of juggling, right? Like it's fun, but there's a lot going on. Yeah.
Well, speaking of juggling, let you all get back to your days, and who knows, maybe we'll be back again next week, and then Molly can get a chance to address this stuff.
I want to hear.
She didn't get a chance. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to everybody for attending and listening. And
So much.
we'll
Thank
maybe
you.
see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.